or later removed, so the fence of the Torah is meant to be only temporary. In Jeremiah 31:31-34, God promises to his people that in the new covenant, he will place his law within them and write it on their hearts. 3, but this will only happen when the Messianic era has dawned. Galatians 4:1-5 says that we are, quote, as minors subject to guardians and trustees until the time set by the Father. But when the time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under law, to redeem those under law, that we might receive the full rights of sons. Continuing this quote, Paul's relation to the law was always based, however, on the fact that, according to the Bible, God is holy and demands holiness. Moses received from time to time the command, be holy, because I, the Lord your God, am holy. It was the Pharisees who emphasized this holiness. Therefore, Paul wrote his hard words, the wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of men, trouble and distress for every human being who does evil, first for the Jew, then for the Greek. So then the law is holy, and the commandment is holy, righteous, and good. The law is similarly spiritual in essence. The law is good if one uses it lawfully. Paul was not thus negative in relationship to the law. It functions and continues to function as Christ's pedagogue. Let me try to give you a simple analogy. If you're driving 100 miles an hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone, and police officer pulls you over and says, didn't you see that sign? And you say, well, the law is written on my heart. I don't need the road signs. He'd tell you if it's written on your heart, then you'd obey it automatically. So if we say it's written on our heart and therefore we have nothing to do with it, it's all abolished, it all goes out the window, you can question whether it's really written on our heart. However, you would also have to say that there are many things that outward law has to set in motion that are not universally necessary if there is universal obedience. For example, it could be that 55 is the limit set for a long journey, even though in many places it's perfectly fine to go 70, and the officers would have no problem with you going 70, but if they put it 70 there, that people would then not slow down properly back in the 55 zone. So the law sometimes has to be a little bit over-consistent because it's dealing with people who are potential lawbreakers, or those laws are there to save our lives, etc., etc. There are plenty of signs that say no swimming. You can maybe stay at a hotel and the pool says no swimming after midnight because there's no supervision. But if you're a good swimmer, you could swim at any time of the day or night and it's not a danger. I could give, obviously, endless examples like this. Just like when you give guidelines for a child. Okay, you have to get up at this time, you have to brush your teeth, you have to make your bed, you have to do this, you have to do that. If when you get older, you haven't worked out how to keep your room clean, how to take care of yourself and make sure you brush your teeth, etc., etc. The goal is not to bring mama back in and have her supervise. The goal is grow up and take better care of yourself. When our daughters were little, Nancy wanted to make sure they got certain things right about their daily responsibilities. She's a black and white person. If she's going to say something, it'll be clearly understood. She communicates very clearly. So there was going to be no ambiguity with the kids. These are the things you were responsible to do each day for yourself and for your room, etc., etc. So she wrote down 10 laws of the house. And she stuck them on the refrigerator, probably about knee level for me, maybe waist level, but just eye level for our little daughters. And both our kids were sharp. Our younger daughter, because of her older sister, year and a half older, reading already and stuff like that, our younger one picked things up early, so she was reading at 3. I remember one day we were spanking our older daughter for something, and she could be melodramatic. She would fall to the ground and start to cry and scream, and we hadn't even touched her. And we were not abusive parents, obviously. It's great as they get older, now they have their own kids, they say, I'm so thankful that you raised me the way you raised me. But she's getting spanked or about to get spanked and crying bloody murder. And Nancy was dealing with her, and I wanted to see what was up with Megan just because Jen, her sister, was being a bit hysterical over being spanked and just was wondering what Megan was doing, our younger one. And I don't see her in the room. I go down the hallway, and she's standing at the refrigerator studying the laws of the house. In other words, I'm a good girl. I'm a very good girl. I'm studying the laws of the house. Listen, I assure you, now that she's married with 2 kids, she does not have those laws, maybe for her kids now. But she doesn't keep them on, I have to do this every day. Why? Because she's grown up. She's grown up. Is it possible? Is it possible that some of the things that God initially gave to Israel were to get them to a certain point and the beginning of a certain era by which they would now become lights to the nations, and some of the scaffolding of the building would no longer be necessary? A lot of it can't be kept anyway. Is that possible? Is it possible, rather than adding on endless regulations that complicate things, that the goal was, as maturity comes, to simplify it? Rabbinic Judaism would basically look at it in a somewhat opposite way, which is the further you're getting away from Sinai, with each new generation, there is spiritual degeneration. Is the famous rabbinic saying, if the previous generation was like angels, we were like men. If the previous generation was like men, we were like donkeys. I remember one time talking to religious Jews about this and saying, well, why don't you just read the scriptures on your own? And they said, I can't understand this. I need to sit on the shoulders of the giants that have gone before me. I was talking to an Orthodox Jewish young man after a debate I had in Maryland in 1987, I believe. And we were talking back and forth, and I was trying to reason with him about things, and whatever I said to him, he would just quote what the rabbi said. And I said to him, look, what does it say in Proverbs 3? So I quoted it from Hebrew. B'tach el Adonai b'chol libecha, ve'el binatcha al tisha'en b'chol drachecha, da'ehu v'hu yasher orchatecha. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Don't lean on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him. He'll direct your paths. And I said, what about that? He said, exactly. I can't lean on my own understanding. I have to ask the rabbis. I thought, whoa, that's a different way of understanding things. So each new generation, theoretically, is at a lower spiritual plane than the previous. So Moses was at the highest. The prophets at a level lower than that. The great sages in Rabbinic Judaism who lived in Jesus' day, lower than that. But if you reverse it, the great sages in Jesus' day, massively higher than our generation, higher than 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago. If you just have it as, again, like the children's game of telephone where you say one thing and pass it through the room and everybody has to repeat it, the closer you are to the original source, the more likely you are of having it right. So what does traditional Judaism teach? That in biblical times, before the time of the exile to Babylon in particular, that the Jewish people did not have formal rote prayers that they prayed every day. That they were spiritual enough. And when you read the Hebrew Bible, it doesn't sound they were quite that spiritual. But when they were spiritual enough, they could just commune with God and just pray in their own words, at their own times, etc., etc. There were certain things that were done by everyone all together. Communal things that the Scriptures laid out. But otherwise, in their own creativity, they could pray freely. They could compose their own prayers. But because of the degeneration of the nation spiritually, because it's further away from its high points, and now has suffered exile, etc., both to keep the community together as well as to help raise their spirituality,